Shade Reaver by E.S. Stevens. Narrated by E.S. Stevens. Music by Patrick Patricios. "Do you come to offer me death?" Sorrent asked, stabbing the long-handled fork into the soft silt soil. Liquid oozed lazily up the sinking tines. A kingly gift, envoy, but death flourishes where I choose to bring it, and I am not content to give it unwarranted. Felon Vane studied him with eyes sharp like diamonds. They were steel blue and glared over the scrap of cloth that he held pressed to his mouth and nose. The look on his face might have been one of repulsion, though at what or who was something he kept to himself. "It is the king, not I, that demands it. Are you not Sorrent, the Shade Reaver?" Vane swatted a flat fly that buzzed past his face. "I was told to find such a man. War is coming, even to you." Sorrent snapped his head up, and Vane immediately retreated back a pace, his hand instinctively going for the sword at his waist, poised to flee or fight. Light as he was on his feet, he almost slid right off the stone mound that protruded out of the rotting mush. Sorrent smiled, his lips yielding to reveal a set of broken teeth. Tentatively, Vane moved his arm back and held up his empty hand. "I did not come all this way to quarrel or fight. Had it been my choice, I would have left you to be forgotten. But these are dark times we live in, friend, and we must all share the burden." Sorrent turned his back on the lordling with a mild shake of the head. Withdrawing his slick fork, he stabbed 2 new holes into the soil, the tines sinking an inch deep before they were suddenly resisted. Gritting the stubs of his teeth, he gave a snort of derision and planted his foot back on the fork, rocking it back and forth. Muscles bunched as he levered the tool against his extended girth until, with a waft of decomposition, he turned over the unyielding patch. A pale corpse tore free from its blanket of soil and flopped over. A face that was grey, mottled with black, and strangely running, stared up at them with the clarity of the dead. Disturbed maggots and worms writhed in the bloodlight of sundown, like penitents caught under torture. Sorrent watched as they reburied themselves, lulled by the low drone of the flies and the desperate cackle of crows. Vane looked away in disgust. Such life? Such beautiful, bountiful life? "Dwantari!" Vane shot at him angrily. "For what reason His Majesty sees fit to grant your existence in our lands, I cannot guess. But so long as you remain in it, you will answer him when he calls." He paused before adding quietly, "Should you not, perhaps your welcome is overstayed. You will need to find somewhere else to practice your pastimes." Sorrent blinked his eyes wetly, mind still reeling as if coming up from a dream. Vane inhaled deeply, instantly regretting it with a hacking cough. "Your kin have breached the mountains, and their ships have been seen as far as Darktide. There will be war." Shouldering his fork, Sorrent turned around with a quickness that belied his weight. Sudden enough to elicit a low curse of alarm from the lordling, who lost his perch and was sent slipping backwards into the muck. Sorrent paid the torrent of protest that followed no heed, merely squelching through the spot he had been slowly sinking into as though he were a dead walker, suddenly compelled to be elsewhere. "Sorrent! Sorrent!" He ignored him, his feet emitting a mould-muddled thump as he ascended to the firmer ground that surrounded the barn. A spotted pig ran squealing as he approached the rot-riddled door, entering and slamming it closed behind him. He flopped into a nearby chair like a puppet torn from its strings. The wooden joints creaked alarmingly, but held. Dwentari! That's what the innocent lordling had called him. An echo of another time. True, he was atypical for the breed. Strong and stocky as the mountains had made him, he had been a warrior of his people, yes. Not for many years had Soren known an equal. He had commanded armies, torn down palaces. No creature, not man nor beast, had been spent unwisely. His glory was justly deserved. And for what? Shade Reaver, they called him. He whose gardens had once held a harvest of waiting friends. From the ash fields of Cadron to the Valindic plains, still sheathed in once virgin ice. From the peaty bogs of the Great Canal to the unconquerable mountain peaks. Like a farmer, he had sown for the future in numbers too vast to name. A plantation that saw nothing was brought to waste. Once living hands tilling the soil, turning the bloating corpses left by the machine of war till they gestated towards ripeness. Thousands had expired, and, in time, Soren had passed them all, dragging them away to nurseries so they could replenish the soil in their turn. But it was the nature of lesser creatures to attach small names to great things, and so they called him the Shade Reaver, destroying his fields and turning him away. Now there was just this, his garden, delivered in return for a few fleeting secrets. How easily these foppish Droragar could be appeased. He vaguely remembered wondering why his people had not done this centuries ago. Now he was surrounded by them, like weeds. Today was not the first time he had swallowed those words. Soren eased himself back up to his feet and shuffled towards the rear door leading further into the barn proper. It groaned as he pulled it to one side. The stench was unimaginable. He sighed with a simple pleasure as he wandered slowly down the groves of crucified men and women and other things. Here could be found the bodies of almost every race, including some he felt sure no longer existed, staked to the ground like strange saplings. He tended to each of them, one by one, with all the care of a father to his children, noting which would be ready for planting in the living orchard outside. A fetid breeze escaped through the broken roof and moved the dead, making them creak and sway in a mockery of life. Drawing a hooked knife from his belt, he sawed away a hand that had already begun to pull away at the wrist. A nectarine blackness trickled from the cut. He salivated. The great fields had been purged, but he would build again, slowly this time, with greater care. He needed only the years to see it done. The thought thrilled him. The thick silence was broken by the retching sound of heaving guts. "There are a great many of your kind here," Soren said, aware that the Drow envoy must have followed him in the barn, and was now pressing against the door as his noontime meal was voided from his stomach. "You ripen like good wheat, teeming with life." He threw the putrefying hand onto the ground. Vane spat bile and stomach juices onto the floor, feeling his stomach spasm as he looked up into Soren's face from where he had squatted. "What madness?" he began, before another tide overwhelmed him. "The king shall know of your games." Soren licked the knife with a wide smile and laughed. "Your king already does. He entertains me because I am useful. I know things," he murmured. "Then what shall I tell him about his request?" Somewhere outside, a flock of birds cried out in fevered voices. Soren looked up to the roof. "You come at an auspicious time. For the first day in many years, my brothers are coming to stay." His face widened to a rictus grin. "I recommend that you make preparations."